University, her focus shifted to leprosy and tuberculosis, so to research for biomarkers for diagnosis of early disease and disease severity. She has published more than 165 full-length papers in international journals with a citation index of 7,248, IL-10 index 128, H index of 47. These figures are quite remarkable. She was awarded a gold medal for obtaining first position in USC from University of Karachi and Commonwealth Scholarship for a PhD from University of Western Ontario, Canada. She has received Bursar Gallo Award from the American Society of Nuclear Medicine USA for Best Paper on development of a highly sensitive method for detecting antibodies to parasite allergens. And her paper on blocking antibodies to allergies in parasitic disease was included in ICMR Chronicles 1950 to 2010. She also received a Khan University Award for Excellence in Research, Ross Prize in Basic Medical Sciences, Lifetime Achievement Award, Pakistan Society of Pathology, Tama Imtiaz and Sitara Imtiaz Civil Awards from Government of Pakistan. She has been listed in the top 20 most influential women in science in the Muslim world in January 2014, and Asia Academy's ASA has listed 150 scientists for Pakistan Asia in 2018. He is an fellow of Royal College of Pathologists, Pakistan Academy of Sciences, Islamic Academy of Sciences, the World Academy of Sciences, where she also served as a council member and later on as vice president of the Central and South Asia till 2018. She is life patron of Pakistan Society of Immunology, and she is also a very opinion member of WS. So this is my pleasure to invite Dr. Rabia and start her presentation. Dr. Rabia.
Thank you very much, Veena, for that introduction. Very long. I would like to thank the OWSP Pakistan chapter, Dr. Veena, and Dr. Saim, and all the organization for arranging this really perfect infrastructure for this lecture. I hope all of you are tuned in properly and you can hear me. Today what I'm going to do is let you go through some of the challenges and the role that leadership can play in development of science, where the resources are stretched. So basically, the role, what I decided that we can talk about not only role but contributions and challenges for women scientists, and we can start with our past, what is present and what is future, so that this is a long journey, but I'll try to take you through in a systematic fashion. The points to ponder upon while I go through the lecture, and I would like all of you to think about it and maybe even comment on it so that we can learn more. And what I thought was we should start with the role of a woman who has always been a driver of change. We can go through the traditional and non-traditional contributions of women throughout history, some historical perspectives about women in science, who were trailblazers, covering like early 19th and 20th century, dwell on what her contributions were, West versus East, academic ladder and challenges for female scientists, role of future female science leaders, and current situation in Pakistan. Of course, I have to end with current situation in Pakistan so that we are all aware of where we need to go. So first is woman as a driver of change. Throughout history, I think from the beginning of civilizations, women's traditional contributions have been very little acknowledged. There is no formal recognition, but she's been a housemaker, a labor force in agriculture and cottage industry. Major contributions. Non-traditional contributions are or professional contributions. She has served as educators. Actually, this is the first role where she was accepted readily as teacher. So educators, physicians and scientists were more difficult to get into. Lawyers and administrators, bureaucrats and diplomats and leaders of the country. Maybe this on this forum you can have others the uh, address the role, other roles. But what I have focused on is as physicians and scientists. So let's see what the historical perspective are. And I wonder how many of you know that the first woman that was recognized as a physician was in 2700 BC. An ancient Egyptian physician described this inscription as chief physician, the earliest known female scientist named in the history of science. Agamede was cited by Homer as a healer in ancient Greece before the Trojan War. So women have long been in medicine, which is not really acknowledged by a lot of the world. Starting from formal recognition of women, whereby women were formally inducted into medical colleges. You know, the first woman who was trained in a medical college was Elizabeth Blackwell. And at that time, she applied to 14 medical colleges, and women were not admitted into medical college. What happened was her getting into the medical college was a fluke, because a small university in New York, where she applied, men were asked to vote if they should admit her, and they thought it was a big joke. And as a joke, they voted for her. And to their surprise, she made it and she was admitted into the medical college. So that's how women got into medical college. She was the only woman in that medical college. And she made her name afterwards by, with her experience, what she did was that she founded the first women medical college in New York. So that's how women started getting medical education. I have what I have tried to do is I've tried to extract some of the really trailblazers in science, those who really made uh, a, um, a contribution that to this date we are still using. These women were born between early 19th and 20th century, and their groundbreaking discoveries changed the field of science. So they were recognized nationally, internationally for their contribution. Not that it was easy for them. What I've done here is given you some of the research area and the country that these women scientists belong to. So they were physicists, biophysicists, biochemists, biologists, cytogeneticists, and so on. The country of origin, as you see up here, is USA 4, UK 2, German 2, France and Poland 1, and Italian 1. So it's all from the Western world. This is the story of the 18th, 19th century that we are talking about. No one from the East was recognized in the sciences. What were their contributions? Why were they recognized? Everyone, as I go through this, I think you will recognize every single woman that I have. The reason what I have done here is chronologically I have given their history so that you know that what century they were in and what struggles they would have had to get to this stage and what kind of support they needed. So Marie Curie, born in 1867, her husband was a physicist. That was her major support system. And she was the only woman who got Nobel Prize 2 times. One in physics and one in chemistry. And this is still a record. And what she did was discovered radioactive elements and she isolated pure radium. So that was the physics. The first one was physics and the second was chemistry. And really, we are still reaping the fruits of her findings. Come to next, born 1902. So now we have started with the 20th century. And she was also a Nobel Prize winner. And she's the only woman who was a sole winner. Otherwise, all the other Nobel Prizes have been shared with men. She was called the jumping gene ladies because she was the first one to recognize that gene elements can transpose from one part of the genome to another part. And that was her contribution, and this has made enormous difference in the genetic studies. We now come to Maria Mayer, again in physics, Nobel Prize winner in 1963, born in 1906. So it took them a long journey of 70 years before their work was recognized. And she discovered the atomic nucleus sheet. Again, a very, very important finding in the field of nuclear structure of nucleus. We come to Rachel Carson, and again you see the diversity. This is a marine biologist, born in 1907, again US, and she did not get a Nobel Prize, but she won Presidential Freedom Award. And I think if you go back and look at it, the Nobel Prize committee should again reconsider giving her a posthumous Nobel Prize. But Nobel Prize are not given posthumously. And her work was as an environment conservationist. And she made this profound remark: we are only in the last 5 to 10 years, we are waking up to the environmental challenges. And what she said was, underlying all of these problems of introducing contamination into our world is the question of moral responsibility. Responsibility not only to our own generation, but those of the future. And I think there is an underlying message up here for all of the scientists. Moral responsibility is an issue I will address again and again in terms of scientific integrity and scientific moral responsibility. But she pointed this out, and the world is now only awakening to the challenges of environmental contamination. So you see, their impact is 100 years, 200 years on, their impact is still there of their discoveries. We come to the neurologist, Rita Levi Montellicini. I think she's the Italian one. And what she discovered was the nerve growth factor. All of you recognize how important this discovery was, because nerve degeneration is permanent. And this was a remarkable finding for the field of neurology. Gertrude Elion, she was born 1918, so now we are into the 19th century, 20th century. And her contribution was rational drug design. All of you know, we are reaping the fruit of it now. All of the drugs, like antiviral drugs, and of course corona, hopefully we will come up with a rational drug design for corona as well. This was her contribution, how to design a drug which is specific for that particular virus. So AZT, AZB are called herpes, a very common problem, and some people suffer from it a lot. I'm one of them. We come to the next person, which is Rosalind Franklin, physics. And I would like to point out something up here. One of the things that all of you know is there was a big hullabaloo when someone remarked about Rosalind Franklin that she is running around in pants in the lab. And one of the scientists said that, and there was a lot of criticism and so on. So even at this time, 1920 to 1958, there was male chauvinism even within the colleges. I think it's still there, but at that time it was rampant because women were few and far between. And she was doing X-ray diffraction analysis of the genome, And this is the famous photo 51, which was one of the best photographs that was ever taken of the genome, of the DNA. And Watson and Crick looked at this and they immediately understood the significance of this photo because it described the double helix. And they were rewarded for their discovery of DNA double helix by Watson and Crick. And she was not really given the credit. The significance of this photo really won them the Nobel Prize. We come to primatologist Jane Goodall. All of us know who Jane Goodall was. This was social science. I consider her a social scientist because she studied primate behavior. And that taught us a lot about social behavior even in the humans. And she spent her life in the jungles working with the monkeys. You see the picture up there. There was a lot of support for her that she should be given the Nobel Prize, but eventually she was given the Nobel Peace Prize, not for social sciences. And there is even now a big lobby that's saying that she really deserves a Nobel Prize. So women are facing all sorts of challenges everywhere, even up till now. Now this is Christiane Musselin-Volhard, a biologist, and it's getting very close to our peer groups. She was the one who discovered the master genes that control basic body parts. Everyone thought that there is a stem cell and all the body parts are made from that same stem cell. What she showed was no, there are pools of cells which control pools of genes that control different parts of the body. And that was a very important finding in biology. It changed how we thought about human development. So, no one from the East. What about women scientists in the East? They didn't exist, they didn't make a mark in science, they weren't doing anything. That's not the case. Actually, recently, a lot of women are being recognized in different fora. For example, ASA, which is part of the Inter Academy panel. I think QAS is also part of it. They did a survey of women in Asia. And what they did was they chose 50 women and they wrote up inspiring stories about these women and how they succeeded. Now, this is a book that is present in all the libraries, and I would strongly advise the young scientists to go and read as to what were the barriers and how did they overcome these barriers. What I did was I chose women scientists from economically similar countries to see what their problems were, what did they write about their problems. There are 6 of them here, and their stories had a common theme. They all had educated parents. They all did their post-graduation in developed countries, and I'll tell you why that is very important. And their challenges were the balance between family and career, particularly in certain age group when they are biologically reproductive. And their mid-career coincided with childbearing age. Now, why was this a challenge? You see, mid-career is when all the young prizes for young scientists are given. And that's their most difficult time. To go away from home, to go to developing worlds and train, and so on and so forth. And also the prizes are given during this stage, when the woman has the most difficulty. We have been talking about advocating that the prizes for young women scientists should not be classified in the same age group as male scientists because of these different issues. Why is post-graduation in developed countries important? I think we all know that in the less developed countries, one, we don't have a critical core of scientists. 2, we do not have the depth. And 3, we do not have program and oriented research where a huge team can be prepared. And these are the reasons why you have to go to a developed country to get an experience of science depth. To give an example, when I was doing a postdoc at NIH, one day we were sitting in the cafeteria and my boss and I counted 14 Nobel Prize winners in the cafeteria having tea. That's the kind of depth that NIH has. So it's not individual mentorship. What you are living in a nursery where there is combined mentorship. You are talking to people about science. You are getting diversified. You are getting in-depth scientific knowledge, which is not limited to one special area. And that kind of experience is extremely important to have an in-depth understanding of science, but also when you go on your mid-career level and next to the leadership level, these experiences count a lot because you learn from these scientists in a very broad, in a diverse manner that you can never get if you do not have a critical core of scientists. And that was, I think, that is still a major problem in most of the countries in the East. I cannot stop with women scientists without really acknowledging our own woman physician who contributed the most in leprosy control. Again, she was a German nun. It wasn't one of our own, but we adopted her as one of our own. She received many international awards. She received the highest national award of Pakistan and an honorary citizenship of Pakistan. I don't know how proud she was of that. But I had the pleasure of working with her for over 2 decades. And my entire leprosy program was done in collaboration with her. And this is the center that she supported. She came here in 1950. It took her 10 years before she could go on to make a center. She came at a time when leprosy patients were not even looked at by the clinician. The physicians were very hesitant in treating leprosy patients. There was no treatment at that time. But this woman paved the way for, this is the reference center. She made a network that covered 80% of the Pakistani population, and she controlled leprosy ahead of the WHO target in 1984. Since then, the program is still continuing, and the program is now also looking after handicapped patients when the patients are treated and they're still left with the handicap. So she is rehabilitating the patient. She believes that patient is not just a patient until it's been treated. Until that patient is rehabilitated in the community and is a self-sufficient, independent person, she did not give up that. And that was her contribution to make these patients independent and contributing to the community. And that's why I've written up here, she was a human par excellence. Okay, so recently, the world woke up to this woman in science, and there was a very interesting survey done by the International Islamic Academy of Sciences, which is a part of the OIC, which is Organization of Islamic Countries. And the reason why they did it is they always felt that the Muslim world lagged in science compared to the Western world, and women scientists even more. And they did a critical survey. I'm on it, but I never knew about it until I got a call from the president of Pakistan Academy of Sciences that I was on the list. I don't know how they did it. It was after it was published that I found out that it was a critical survey done by several committees. And what they were trying to do was not just list women in science who had made contribution to science. They wanted to know what was the impact of these women on science. What was the influence? And they divided the list into 3 eras of major influence. They divided the list into those who were pioneers, and I'm very proud to say that Veena is sitting right here. She was on that list. The shapers, I was on that list. And then the emerging champions. And Sania Nishtar is on this list. We are all still active. Because what they said was that Veena's impact, they said, will be 2000 and plus years. And we see she's still here 2020. The shapers, their impact of what they have done will have an impact 2020 and beyond. So I was on that list. And the emerging champions is Sania Nishtar, who's on this list. And they said her impact will be, because she was much younger, her impact will be until 2040. And I think they are absolutely, they were right on target, because Tanya is running the SAS program here, which is one of the most successful programs which is being run by the government of Pakistan. So it was the impact of leadership. How long will the influence be? And this is the kind of leadership we are looking at, I think. So let's see what are the requirements for becoming a leader. A usual track, both in the West, I think, and now it's being adopted in the East as well, is that you start with studentship. You see, funding support is one of the major problems for women, including in the resource-strapped countries. It's much more. So, supporting studentship, you need a couple of postdocs. This allows you to transit into independent scientists, and that is then allows you to go the transition to leadership. Non-clinical, you need a PhD, you need skills development, which comes in fellowships, career development, you need research grants, and then senior non-clinical fellowships or funding grants. So what are the critical requirements of a research leader? You have to have academic excellence. That's the first requirement. In-depth training at centers of excellence. Ability to obtain funding for program, multi-arm research. Meaningful contributions, meaningful collaborations. And I'll go into a little bit the niche of that. Why are meaningful collaborations so important? Ability to develop a meaningful team with depth. Develop research infrastructure which is sustainable even after you are gone. Develop rigorous research criteria and develop the next year of leaders. I think this is really the critical role of a research leader. And I think OWSD has done a marvelous job of identifying those individuals who are at the postdoc level. This is the most critical training in order to get to the independent stage. And this is the most difficult time for women. So to identify women at this level who have the ability or who have the potential to become future leaders is what OWSD is contributing to. And these are the women that have their stories, that have completed their training. And March 2021 newsletter, you can go and see their stories. So you see, they are from all over the world. It's both Muslim and non-Muslim women, and they are trying to identify potential leaders to develop the next year of leadership. So what is my message to the new leaders? If you are there, if you are tuned in, this is what I will try to say. Try and prepare sustainable and viable systems for the next year. Very important. Anything you do should be sustainable. Instill a sense of moral integrity towards rigorous scientific values in the team. One of the major problems is in this race to get publications out, a lot of not very solid publications come out, and a lot of the times I have seen that especially those journals that have a very good impact factor or are peer reviewed, sometimes you have to retract if they find out that this is not rigorous science. You don't want that to happen. Mentorship is required at all levels and be available so that they can benefit from your experience of failure and successes. The scientific and ethical goals should be in sync. These are my messages for the next year of leadership. Meaningful collaborations. Why are they important? You know, this is Dr. Hazel Doppler from the London School of Hygiene, Medicine and Hygiene, LSHTN. And I had a marvelous relationship with her. We worked together for over 20 years. And this is her statement about me, but let me tell you what she meant to me. What she meant to me was our labs, although they were several miles apart, she in London and I in Pakistan, we paid at least 2 to 3 visits, exchanged 2 to 3 visits. We sent our postdocs, we sent our PhD students, we exchanged. They came to my lab to do the field work. We went there so that our students went there to develop the skills and the technical skills. But among these trips, it was not just that. We also learned about what ethical and moral science is all about. I was enriched because I had a second mentor for my students and my postdocs. And these collaborations only last when there is a give and take relationship, when there is a trust between the two collaborators. She's just one of my collaborators. I had several. I had Case Western Reserve University, where Jerry Elner collaborated with me because of my NIH connections. And then I had also at the field level Dr. Ruth Falk. My leprosy program was with Hazel, and then the TB program was with the Masumeen Hospital and a wonderful director, Dr. Ghaffar Dawood, who still is in touch with me. So these meaningful collaborations add a lot of depth to your program, and you learn a lot with each of the sites that you go to and visit. And Najiha can tell you, my PhD student who's now an associate professor, as to how much she learned from these exchanges that I had. And this is my research team, which is the next year of leadership and workshop. And I'm very proud to say that all of these are leaders. Afia is head of the Department of Microbiology. Rubina is a former head of Microbiology department. She was the next one after me. Zara Hassan, who is section head and chair of research committee. You have Najia up here, who is associate professor and is making a name in research itself. This really was my critical core administrative team. Maqbula is now at Indus Hospital as the manager of microbiology, and Amna is still there, and she really ran my leprosy research program. All of the documentation, critical documentation, development of the serum banks, development of the tissue bank was done by her. And this is what the team together, there were 5 people who were you can see at all levels, from manager to research assistant to PhD students. This is my secretary. We had only one male member who's still there, and I had a wonderful time. This was Asif, and he had the ability to get along with women. You know what my major problem was when I came back to Aga Khan? My major problem was there were 2 males there. And when I joined as head of the department, but both of them resigned. They could not accept a woman leadership position as head of department. So both of them, one transferred to biochemistry and one resigned outrightly. That if I'm not the head, I don't want to stay here. So, that's the time. But our deans were from the West. They recognized who the leader should be. And we went on to develop a very powerful women's scientist team who are the next year of leadership. And I'm very proud of this. This is what is called sustainable leadership. If you don't develop the next year of leaders, your science is not going to mean that much. Um, what else in the leadership role other than development of science? You also need to get them on to the next year. This is the board of governors, Marie Adelaide Leprosy Center, on which I was for 20 years. But Rumina got onto it when she became professor. And Dr. Pau was very cognizant of the fact that she wanted women on her board. She felt they were more loyal, they were more dedicated, and she could get along with them more. So this is also another thing that Dr. Paul brought into the leprosy program. You will find a lot of women scientists there as well, working in the field. What are the challenges for women scientists? Are they real? There was an article that came out in March 13, 2020. And what were the challenges that were recognized? I think I'm Peter. What are the kind of challenges that women are facing at work, even in 2020, 2021? Workplace factors. Do you feel work? I think all of the women that are hearing this will identify with it. I don't even have to go through it. But these are really the challenges. Performance appraisal done fairly. This is in an environment where men and women are in equal numbers, or maybe even if women are there. What I find, what I would like, and I don't know how many of you feel that way, is that when you are at the lower tier, you are much more acceptable. It's when you get onto the leadership position, independent leadership position, that's when you face the toughest challenge. Because men feel that they should be the leaders no matter where they are. And I think this is where the challenges for women are going to be in the 20th and the 21st century, as to how you get to the leadership position and make yourself acceptable, and you have fair assessment and evaluation. And this is what is there. I think if you want to read it, this I've given the link below. And these are all issues. The answers will be the same. Maybe in our part of the world, there will be more negative answers. But this is what we need to address. And I think OWSP is doing a marvelous job of addressing all of these issues. We need more organizations and more fora like that to support women. Again, I have picked out two more things about women challenges. One is by Thomas Reuters Foundation. Violence, sexual abuse to gender pay gaps, and restrictive reproductive rights. Women and girls continue to face obstacles in achieving equality. And this was done after research. This is the final finding that was published. And a recent study, do you know what the STEM is? I think STEM is another organization that is doing a lot of work which is supported by UNESCO. And these STEM fields are really, we all know what these STEM fields are. They are science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And again, they have pointed out that low female participation in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. All fields, there is a low participation. Persistent barriers for undergraduate female students and faculty in STEM fields. There is a lack of faculty. So critical core is again an issue, and a widening gap, gender gap in high rank position. This is what I just addressed. So what can we do about changing this? Advocacy. As I said, getting women more onto positions of power, position of decision making, get them on boards, policy making, support female scientists at the national and international level. I think this is a major task of all the women leaders and all the organizations which they are struggling to do. I cannot end without commenting on the current situation in Pakistan. First of all, province-wise literacy rates of Pakistan. They have been improving from 1960 to 2020. Um, all provinces have shown the literacy rate has gone up from 10% to 60%, which is very good over 2 decades. Um, but when we break it down in terms of female literacy rate, you see half of them. It's still much lower. In each province, um, Punjab has the highest, Sindh follows, KPK, and then Balochistan. Female literacy rate is still lagging, and we need to improve that. Why is female literacy rate important? Why should women be educated? And what I think the best answer that I found was from the Aga Khan, His Highness the Aga Khan. If you educate a female, you educate a family. The woman is responsible for bringing up the family. She is the one who can instill the idea of and support a female education if she is educated herself. And I think there is a lot of wisdom that he advised that if you have one male and one female and you can only educate one person, it should be the female. Because her contribution will be far more to educating the community. That's how the community will get educated. And maybe we can then change the ratio at our national level. This was Pakistani first recognized 2015. They wanted a calendar of who are the prominent scientists in Pakistan. They suddenly woke up, and this is what the ratio is. I hope we can change the ratio, and we don't have comments like, for example, when the Islamic IS list came out of the top 20 Muslim scientists. I got a comment. So what's this? What's so great about this? These lists are published every second day. This was from an educated professional colleague of mine. I hope we can change that mindset. And I think I would like to end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabia, for this very and very light also for the men as well as for the politicians and the leaders of all the developing world, and particularly in Pakistan. So there are two things which I noted from your lectures. Can you hear? Can you hear? There are two things which I particularly noted. One, education of women, and
I should come closer. Can you speak a little?
One
That way.
You talked about education of women in general. So I noted that education percentage of educated women is increasing, which is delightful. But what about education of women in science? Is the ratio increasing, declining, or as far as it was in 20th?
That's a very important question. And I looked through to find out some figures for women in science in Pakistan. And there are none available. I could find them on Google. And I don't think those kind of studies are done. And I think this is what we need to do. We should try and get some of the women organizations to really take up, get a survey done, specifically of women in science. We know about women in workplaces. We know about women in institutes. But I think that those are very selective figures, and I would rely on them. What I would like to know is how many women are there in science in Balochistan, for example, or in AJK, where the literacy rate is going much higher and there are more universities being built. and I don't think it was kind of rigorous. There may be figures which are um, not really rigorously statistically proven. So I cannot talk about that. But I think you're asking a very important question. Just like the literacy rate, if we can also do the females break up in different fields. It's not just science. I would like to know how many are there in the administration, in policy making. That's also important. So, yes, I don't know which forum. I think Pakistan, the government of Pakistan or the Higher Education Commission should assign this and give funding for it so that it can be done in a rigorous scientific manner. And that is what I think should be one of the roles of Higher Education Commission, because they have all the figures of the universities, and someone can do that. Because I observed that support from government and from political leaders
I observe that support from government and from political leaders is very much for any achievement of our thing. Special, I'm inspired that women are spending that they are driving wheels together and career, but they are not getting the support that they should get in all other sectors. So, but anyhow, it was a very good, very nice, very excellent talk and very eye-opening. And I wish that this technology is spread to the women, but
we
also
should send this to the Higher
men
Education Commission.
and to academy, whatever sectors are there. Thank you once again, Dr. Adya, for a very nice lecture. Thank you very much. So I can we can take some more questions.
Assalamu alaikum. Um, can I ask a question if I'm audible?
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much. Ma'am, it was a lovely lecture. I am an undergraduate first year student at Dow Medical College, and I went through the website of OWSD and I saw the membership criteria, and it said that only postgraduates or those who have completed their undergraduate, only they can become members. Why is that so? Why cannot I be a member? I'm also a member of the American Chemical Society that allows undergraduate students. Why doesn't OWSD allow undergraduate students to be a part of this?
I do not know what their selection criteria are, frankly, but Veena should be able to answer that. The question is, why are undergraduate not allowed to be member of OWSD? I think they can be affiliate members, or I don't know, I'm not sure about that, but that is one option that the OWSD could look at if people are interested.
There is actually can I speak? Actually, OWSD comes under the umbrella of WAS, the World Academy of Science. And the World of Academy of Sciences also has a forum for young scientists, young affiliates. So any affiliate, and I have affiliated to this OWSD or last summer affiliate, that they have invited nominations for young
But she's talking about undergraduate. They are not eligible, I think.
they are not eligible.
We will find and do something about it. Thank you for pointing out.
And we'll
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, to ask questions from the participant, kindly raise your hand so we can open your mic, or you can also open your mic from your end and you can ask your questions. And kindly introduce yourself before asking questions so we can know that who is asking the one. Okay, ma'am, I have a question. I am Sayyeda Arisha Zaidi, PhD student at KIPG University of Karachi. And my question is, ma'am, we are now seeing that we have very low ratio of men in science as well. Even if I talk about my batchmates, there were only 3 boys and we were 12 girls. And the similar ratio we are observing in Karachi University, that there are more than 80% researchers are women. So, what are your opinion about that?
You raised a very interesting actually question. I think there are 2 reasons. One is that men feel that they don't have science doesn't pay, and they need to go into those areas and those fields which can give them rewards in the term of jobs. Basically, they are the bread earners, and the way our science and our institutes are educating, they feel they have not created the next level for them to be able to go on to that. So I think that's one reason. Women have found a niche because men are opting not to come. So you have more. And sometimes I feel that, I heard a very interesting comment at Aga Khan, because that same situation is now true at Aga Khan as well, where there are a lot more women in position of power. In fact, I just showed you 4 people who were head of the department or section head or chair. And in fact, this is resulting in reverse psychology whereby men are threatened by women. And not only that, because of that, they have grouped together to try and inch their way. Again, meritocracy is not being equal opportunity is not there, and men feel that they don't have equal opportunity, so they are fighting back. So I don't know where the balance will come in, but again, we have to learn to live together and treat each other as human beings, not as gender specific, and that's our problem. It's a biological problem.
Yes. And thank you so much, ma'am. And my second question is that we have so many talented researchers all over the Pakistan who are working really hard in different fields. But when we see about the Nobel Prize, we haven't got any except one after Dr. Abdul Salam. So, what do you think that?
And none in female.
Yes, and there was a Peace Nobel Prize to Malala Yousafzai.
Which I don't consider from Pakistan.
Yes. So, what do you think that where we are actually lacking? Because we are trying very hard to do some good work with limited resources, and still we are not getting the international recognition which we deserve, I think.
I think you are very sane to ask the question why. I think that is where the issue is. I can only give you from my limited experience what I think. So don't think that this is an answer. You have to think through yourself. But I think the major problem in Pakistan are twofold. One is we do not have in-depth programs in research. Okay, these Nobel Prizes arise, as I told you, at NIH. You were sitting in the cafeteria and there were 14 Nobel scientists sitting there. I was working in NIAID and there were 200 immunologists. So you see, the kind of critical thinking that develops up there is lacking here because we don't have a critical core. We don't have in-depth program-oriented research. We do not have enough. You see, mediocrity breeds mediocrity. And when you get to the top level and you have a mediocre person up there running the program, he has no idea how to drive science in public. So we are not tapping our talent properly into right direction and creating those islands of excellence that we need through funding. Funding is usually a problem. And that is where you cannot develop a good in-depth program unless the government supports it. In US, the HEW gives up to 75% support if you get an infrastructure. So if you get a research grant, you also get overheads. And those overheads can be up to 75% for development of the infrastructure, because that is not for an individual, that is for the institute. And that's how they support the institute. So if you are doing research, you get overheads, you get support from the government. When I came to Aga Khan, there was no concept of overheads, and they weren't willing to give. And the funding agency overseas does not give overheads to other countries. They feel their government should give the overheads, and our government has no. I think they have no concept of what research and research funding is all about. They are even talking about direct costs. No, 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 this is not right, this is not right. And when you talk to a program officer, I used to, pull my hair. And even at Aga Khan, I had to tell them that, look, this is infrastructure development. This is for the institute. So the institute has to give the money. So we have a lot of problems and a lot of issues. And these are just some of the ones that we have pointed out. And again, I think HEC should wake up to this fact as to what they need to support and who they need to support. They don't even have a clue of what they are supporting. They have concepts of, no, we will support government institutions, we won't support private institutions. The idea is to promote, for them, is to promote research, not where it's done. It's being done in Pakistan. The infrastructure is Pakistan. So, and Aga Khan has a lot of money, but if someone is doing research, you need overheads, which the government should give because it's in Pakistan. That's their obligation. So I don't know, I'm being very unpolitical here, but I think I can afford to now that I'm retired. And they may not want to put me on committees, which I don't care. But this is really the truth.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
You want to make any comment on this?
I just think that you are absolutely right. In our curriculum, we are just making technicians, not the scientists. We do lack critical thinking, and we are not there yet. We think like someone like Einstein or Newton. We are just following the protocols which are given to us. If you talk about a simple procedure like DNA extraction, they give you a protocol and they expect you to follow it. They just don't want you to put your own input.
See, what you are pointing out is towards a lack of critical mentorship. Mentorship is required. I pointed out in my talk as well. You need mentorship at all levels, and I'll just point out that Zara and Najia are still coming to me for mentorship. They're sending me papers, they're sending me grants, they're sending me data as to are we analyzing it properly. So you need mentorship, whether you are at a student level, because we don't have that depth within the institute. If the institute had the depth, you wouldn't have to come to me. There is only one immunologist in the institute. There is only one molecular biologist in this institute. How are you going to get the mentorship? I think that is the problem. The protocols, label protocols.
But I'm thinking that that is why when I all these situations, OWSD, the main secretariat has also managed to announce the mentor and mentorship programs.
Exactly.
And this is what we need for this current area because we always need the mentorship and we always being able to.
That's why I've been talking about OWSD contribution here of developing that postdoctoral level whereby they can become mentors.
Yes.
But the thing is, even if you become a mentor and you have 1 in 100, how are you going to spread yourself out? You need a critical core.
Definitely.
So you need to develop centers of excellence. You need to drive the HEC needs to drive research in those centers, to develop critical core, to develop infrastructure, and to develop this depth in science. Most of the research that is being done is project oriented, and I don't blame, because maybe I will give another talk on what I developed as a program and challenges when I came here, is in terms of how and what kind of skills I had. And why did I succeed? Basically, I had when I came back, I thought I will never succeed in science. My supervisor was so concerned that he flew over from NIH to see if I was in a proper place. And people kept offering me jobs that you are leaving in your mid-career. I think if you want to have drivers, initially you will need drivers for research programs. And for drivers, you need people in their mid-career and to support them so that they develop the next year of leadership and the next year of leadership. But you have to support them properly. The only reason I got support is NIH recognized me. All the institutes knew about me. I had given talks. I was on the committees of WHO. WHO came and funded me for an institutional strengthening grant. And they came and looked at how I was keeping my records. That was the credibility they wanted. How was the science being analyzed? What was the depth in the program? And they kept on doing that. The whole WHO team came. And one of the people said that this is a paradigm for us.
Yes, ma'am. And the most important thing with me is that during the mid-career time of struggle, that our mentors must have to believe in ourselves, and they just wanted us to trust on ourselves, and we would like to try and give our best to them by their mentorship. This is what we actually want. And the key point is never give up on any stages is the key to go forward for other purpose. This is what
But
we
the
think
right mentorship is so important.
very important.
And then
Very, very
critical thinking, and then credibility and morality in science.
absolutely.
If at the top level you don't have, if you have mediocrity, they will only develop mediocrity. And that's what's been happening in Pakistan when you talk about this. Because mediocrity can only breed mediocrity. And we need to really have some high level thinking at the Higher Education Commission as to what the critical core of science should be developed in the program. Not say basic sciences, no, only applied sciences. How can you do applied sciences without having critical knowledge of the fundamental sciences? And you need to introduce that at school level, college level, and they should come well prepared because the students that come in the US, they are thoroughly trained. They can stand up to any master student and answer any question. They have we have an overload of knowledge, but not critical knowledge. Even at the school level, I see children are overloaded with knowledge. What are you going to do with that knowledge? You need to develop critical thinking. Knowledge is not the point, and you need to develop moral behavior right at that stage. If you have cheating and you ignore cheating, how are the students going to develop? What kind of moral values when they come in? When they come in science, they will use the same thing, cut and paste.
Arisha asked a question about international recognition. My question is about national recognition.
Yes, absolutely.
That comes after
I
that.
think
How many programs are there? How many
and
are
feel that how many programs are how many awards and achievements are there for young
But we need to acknowledge leadership and mentorship.
And they are working up two recognitions which are given by Pakistan Academy of Sciences.
otherwise move on.
And how many women are there?
About
They are fighting at two fronts. It's very important that they are recognized and they are encouraged.
and there
Yes, and the awards
and the awards and the are not gendered, so they have to fight.
Can you imagine that comment? That list are published everywhere. He's saying it in my face. And he's a top scientist. No, I don't want to take the name.
what do you say?
He's a friend.
What did you say?
On the list, 20 more. They didn't even know what the list was about. and to tell it on the face, and even a woman, head of the department, said, "What a waste of money." So if we have that kind of vision, how can we go further?
Yeah. But at home it was considered that
ये खत्म हो गया है ना?
नहीं मैम चल रहा है
People are listening still.
Whenever I sometimes have considered that interesting or first, this time it's not just one country itself. Because they will get married,
because they will get married
And medical college.
but it is within the situation entirely changed.
But Veena, there is one still thing that is lacking from the West. There is no social support for women, which is so important. They get special leaves. There are nurseries there. There are, Montessori's there, so on, and we haven't had that vision. But if we have women leaders, they will be able to do that. And that's why women leaders are so important. Women leaders, they will be able to do that. But we don't have a better. You and I, what are we going to do? Na 3 mein, na 13 mein.
The women who are listening first.
I hope that is why, I gave that message, what you should be doing. And I hope you will take that message seriously.
Yes, ma'am, exactly. As you have mentioned, this was our time that we would look for the foreign funding for foreign scholarships, but there weren't any, and we were trying so hard to find anything that could give us an international exposure. But all of them are for postdocs, or even in PhDs, there are not much scholarships available. And
Few and
we are
far
really
between. There are available, but few and far between. Very competitive, and Pakistan is never on the priority list.
yes, and we are even in publishing papers, we are struggling so hard that
Because of the
it's
credibility,
very difficult.
It's very difficult.
if it goes from a good lab, it's immediately accepted. But here they are always trying to think as to manipulation of data coming, that kind of thing. Overcritical. If you have a person from the West on your paper, you get it. I'm very sorry to say I'm very, very unfair.
It's very difficult actually.
And then it's very expensive.
It's very
And Higher Education Commission should think about that. They want us to publish in high impact journals. Neither the institution nor the grants nor the higher education pays for it.
Also, ma'am, after COVID, there are so many financial restraints and financial.
I didn't talk about post-COVID, but maybe that can be another topic.
So I think we are going to the end of the session. And here's the announcement for everyone that you will be sent your certificates and the feedback forms. Kindly fill that feedback form so we can do better in our future events. And that's it for our side for today. Thank you so much for attending our session.